and hear about these scary insider wars going on and hope that they're not going to be able to collapse the economy, or hope that they're not going to be able to invade, or hope that there's not going to be a false flag. I want you to actually come out of this feeling empowered and feeling uplifted and knowing that there is something positive that's going on here. So I want to just do a little bit here and kind of go full circle to where I started, because I think this is very, very critical information. If you look at the work that I've been doing on History Channel, I've now had 5 episodes on Ancient Aliens, which I'm very glad is happening. I don't know how it worked. It was a miracle in the first place, but it did happen. There is a consistent worldwide history of human extraterrestrials showing up in ancient cultures that are giving us civilization. They're giving us religious constructs, which of course become convoluted and go towards the negative. But there's also documentation, much like you see in the Hindu scriptures, much like you see in Zoroastrian scripture, all over the place, a description of wars between rival extraterrestrial factions. And the good guys have always been there, and they're hierarchical. You got to remember, in the Bible, there's multiple types of mighty ones, or Elohim. Angels being the bottom of the hierarchy. Then have archangels. Then have what are called virtues. Then have what are called powers. You then have what are called cherubim. And finally, at the top, you have what are called seraphim. And when you look at this hierarchical structure, specifically you go up into the higher levels, the seraphim always are shown as having 6 wings. This is how they're described. Now, William Henry made a convincing argument at our conference that we recently did together, that he invited me to do, and I accepted, that the 6 wings would actually represent the double tetrahedron. These beings do manifest the geometric Merkaba, what Richard Hoagland's been talking about all this time, when they come out. The other thing he said that I found really remarkable is that many, many of these traditions talk about the seraphim as serpent beings. And it's in the Bible, and there's documents of this, there's drawings of this, and there's other cultures that refer to serpent beings as well. He makes the argument that what they are calling the serpent is actually the end of a wormhole that appears when these beings show up. So you now have a being that shows up in a double tetrahedron, which is the 6 wings, with the wormhole behind him, hence the Stargate. And these beings, we have very little testimony from insiders on them, but we do have what we heard from, my gosh, I blocked his name out because we had such trouble with the guy. Dan, I blocked him out.
You're talking about Dan Burish?
Dan Burish, of course, right. Because Dan Burish, of course, turned on us, and it was very public. He turned on Project Camelot. He turned on me after the Zurich conference. No big secret there. And he did have somebody who was working with him who was allegedly a psychiatrist, and some of the stuff that came out online that was his description of events that took place while we were at Ballenberg, so forth, were wildly distorted. So anyway, before Dan kind of was gotten to by whoever manipulated him to turn on us, he did give information, which I think is interesting, describing the manifestation of a being that showed up in their office while they were working on some sort of global grid thing where they were thumping the grid with energy and getting this X pattern to show up by hitting HARP against a certain vortex point in Frenchman Mountain, where they were harvesting this original genetic material from the oldest rock outcropping on Earth and trying to reverse engineer the human genome out of it from the beginning of life on Earth. That was the plan he was in. It was called Project Lotus. What Burish said is that while they were doing this and thumping the grid and basically activating this vortex, that this being manifested, and nobody could have any defense against it. It was a being of light. It had some strange properties which are totally the same as what you read about in the Bible about the seraphim and the cherubim, in that regardless of which direction you looked at the being from, its face was pointed towards you. And this shows up in many ancient frescoes as beings that have 4 faces, one on the front, 2 on the sides, and 1 in the back. Shows up in the Mayan tradition, shows up in Hinduism, shows up in Buddhism, shows up on totem poles. So this is not new stuff. These apparently do represent the seraphim or cherubim, the highest level of angels described in the Bible. These beings that come in on a stargate, they don't need a UFO, they have a tetrahedral Merkaba around them. And again, Burrish's testimony is that they manifested, they could blow out the windows, and they basically said, stop what you're doing, we're not going to let you get away with this. You tie in what Henry Deacon has told us, that there are beings out there powerful enough to actually manipulate the moon and construct the moon at a specific design template. Specifically now, the moon is designed to have a width of 2,160 statute miles. Why that's important is that the radius of the moon is 1,080 miles, which happens to be the lunar feminine number, 1,080. It's in gematria, it's in the physics of the universe, and the moon is precisely the right size as well, that it can have a perfect eclipse with the sun to create a perfect corona, a perfect ring around the sun. That's not an accident. According to Henry Deacon, there are beings that are literally powerful enough, what Michio Kaku would call a Type 5 civilization, that can manipulate the moon and actually design the moon like that. So when we bring in the seraphim, cherubim component, this is where what Burrish is saying correlates very interestingly with what I have seen in the Law of One material and in other sources, suggesting that there is a level of this game where these beings see everybody, and this includes all the ETs in the saucers and all the New World Order, Old World Order, whatever you want to call them, the Illuminati. They're all like children in a sandbox. And I believe that you can look at the intelligent energy of the universe, and I could go off on this too, and Richard has been talking about this, and see that life, biology, is written into the fabric of creation. It's written into the basic energy that makes matter, that makes space, and that makes time. And therefore, consciousness is also written into the universe. There is data from the Russians that show that you can take the genetic code and put it in a digital form where it's then scrambled into a light pattern, which means that digital information in photons can be zipping throughout our galaxy, throughout the universe, which may account for why Hoyle and Wickramasinghe say that everything they see throughout the whole galaxy is bacteria. 99.9% of all the dust out there, which is all stuff shooting off of stars, is bacteria. So stars appear to be factories for life. Planets have life. Life is written in the background energy of the universe. I honestly do not believe that if you're looking at a universe that is constructed where life is everywhere, that a planet is going to be overlooked and forgotten about. I believe that any and all levels of intelligence will exist in a hierarchical structure of increasing complexity and increasing advancement, going all the way up to ultimately what would be an intelligence throughout the cosmos, an intelligence that is one, where the cosmos itself has a singular identity, and everything else is an iteration of that identity. So these beings, the seraphim that you hear about in the Bible that are depicted on the totem poles with the four faces in the Mayans and the Egyptians even have some of that, all of this stuff seems to be a level in which there are beings that are making sure that we're going to be okay. And from this perspective, the Earth becomes a spiritual laboratory whose purpose is for us to have the illusion of duality, the illusion of good versus evil, which in turn gives us all a criteria to strive for whether we're going to be a spiritual person or whether we're going to be a negative person and manipulate and control people. So I believe that what really is going on here, the real disclosure in my view, is that the Earth is a spiritual laboratory, and all of this stuff that's happening out there is a stage play that's designed for the evolution of our consciousness, and the choice that we all make at this time is, do we throw up our hands in hopelessness, or do we realize that there is a golden thread woven through history in which what's happened to the Earth is being allowed to happen by these management beings, these higher level beings, the seraphim, so that we all are inspired to do something to help the planet and to help each other. That's why the negatives are allowed to exist. In my view, the negatives are being brought down. They will not be allowed to do these various attacks against us. Doesn't mean we should drop our guard, but it does mean that we need to educate ourselves about what the real criteria is for how well the Earth goes through this stuff. And in my view,